director of the International Human Rights Program here at UT, Renu Mandani, and her assistant, Karen Norrington. As well, Matt Eisenbrandt of the Canadian Centre for International Justice, as well as Ellen Schifrin of Amnesty International, who are sponsoring this event. And in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Price of Amnesty International, who'd like to add some words of introduction as well. I'm going to just say, make a few very brief remarks about the issue of accountability. And really what I want to say is it's wonderful to be talking about accountability because so much of the discussion that we now have is about what gets called transparency. Now, people talk a lot about transparency in relation to the activities of transnational corporations abroad. And so I just want to say a few words about the relationship between transparency and accountability. So when you hear discussions of transparency, and they're everywhere and they're all over the place and they're very prominent in conversations at the national, regional, and international level about corporate responsibility, what is often at issue is disclosure. The idea that corporations ought to disclose information, ought to both gather and disclose certain kinds of information. This information is often packaged in the form of indicators or other similar kind of modes, and this information should be disclosed to typically securities commissions or the public. And the information consists often of things like indicators of compliance with environmental norms or norms of human rights or social responsibility. And some examples of that would be the Global Reporting Initiative, or what is most prominent these days is discussion of the Dodd-Frank Act in the United States, which would impose on all reporting issuers, all companies that issue in the United States, and that would include, among others, Canadian companies, require them to disclose information about payments they make to foreign governments, and as well the sourcing of what are called conflict minerals. Do they use any conflict minerals in the production of their goods, and if so, where do those come from? And the idea behind disclosure is really laudable. It is that if companies are required, or companies gather and disclose this information to the public, to investors, to the media, then we all, as consumers and members of the public, and perhaps the citizens of the countries in which these resources are being extracted, will all be in a better position to make decisions about what we buy, what we invest in, and what we demand of our governments. There's certainly nothing to complain about, I think, with respect to requirements of transparency and disclosure. But here are just a couple of things I want to alert you to as we move into a discussion of accountability. One idea that is very popular is that transparency will generate accountability. If information is disclosed, then the market will make people accountable, will make companies accountable. Okay? And if that's true, well, of course, that's a good thing. But a couple of queries to keep in mind are this. Who is responsible for gathering the information? Who verifies the information? Does the information that is gathered and disclosed actually tell us something meaningful about what our bottom line concerns about are, namely conduct by companies abroad and outcomes, consequences in terms of human rights or environmental impact, and so on. Those, so far, are questions that remain unanswered in the transparency, in a lot of the transparency discussions. And instead, what you have often is the idea that accountability means being accountable for disclosing. And so a company would be rewarded because it disclosed, and it would be accountable by failing to disclose. But that kind of accountability for either performing or failing to perform disclosure, is not the same as accountability for actual conduct or actual consequences of what a company does or fails to do in its activities abroad. And that's the piece that we are here to talk about this afternoon. Now, accountability can certainly take several forms. It can be accountability through market discipline, right? And this is the one that is the most popular, I think, certainly amongst companies, right? That the market will regulate us. People will simply choose to invest or not invest, buy or not buy, consume or not consume. That's the market will regulate. Another form of regulation is one that we'll be hearing a lot about today, which is private individuals using the courts to litigate, to bring private legal actions and thereby hold companies accountable for what they have done or failed to do with respect to laws, norms of human rights, environmental impact, and so on. And finally, there is accountability that would be imposed by governments directly on their corporate nationals. And that's an area that is only now beginning to be explored. There again are multiple modes of that kind of accountability one could imagine. Bill C-300 envisaged one kind of accountability where you would have a complaints mechanism to an ombudsperson who would investigate and adjudicate complaints. The CSR counselor is a different mode of accountability, one that doesn't bring consequences to bear as much as facilitate discussion and hopefully resolution of disputes, but again done through a sort of semi-public body. So that's really all I wanted to say by way of introducing the subject of accountability, relating it to something that I think is very much in discussion in the public domain now, namely issues about transparency. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Price to say a few words on behalf of Amnesty International, and then turn it over to the first panel this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Switch.